So
hello there, and forgive the interruption. There was quite a bit of commotion trying to get into the correct room. So I'm likely taking us back a few minutes. I did start the record button and would like to welcome everybody to this session. And my name's KMC. I manage the Fellows Program in Community Development through the Illinois Institute for World Affairs. And my pleasure to introduce our panelists, our guest speakers, and to welcome everybody. A little bit of housekeeping. I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, please enter those in the chat, as well as know that I will alert the speakers when we have about 15 minutes before the session ends so that we have time for the panelists to answer those questions. So everybody will be muted during the presentation. Please enter your questions into the chat. I'll monitor that and then give a time reminder before the end of the session so we can address questions. I'm going to give brief introductions. I know we've already lost a little bit of time, so I'll just let you know that our speakers for this session are Bill Menner, a president of Partners for Rural America, and he's the founder of the Bill Menner Group, consulting firm that focuses on community development, rural partnerships, and economic vitality. Joining Bill today are Jessica AcMoody, and Jessica comes with more than 15 years of experience in state and federal legislative policy and advocacy. During the last 10 years, she's been dedicated to federal policy initiatives at the Community Economic Development Association of Michigan. Her work focuses on building coalitions and advocating for policies that create vibrant, equitable neighborhoods around the state. So welcome to Jessica as well. Also joining us are Kimber Lanning, an entrepreneur, a business leader, and a community development specialist, working to help cultivate strong and resilient communities, inspire higher quality of life for people in Arizona. Lastly, Blanche Shoup, and Blanche is the president and CEO of West Illinois, works in the director of the workforce office in Western Illinois. So Blanche joins us and the rest of the speakers, and I will turn it over to Bill and have you go in the order in which you have agreed on, and I'll start paying attention to the chat. Thank you all, and welcome.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will start rolling there. If it lets, there we go. So as was mentioned, I'm Bill Menner. I'm from Iowa. I run the Iowa Rural Development Council. I'm also the president this year and next of Partners for Rural America, which is a nationwide nonprofit that in essence serves as the national umbrella organization for our state rural development councils. State rural development councils are independent 501c3 organizations, all focused on maintaining and supporting and empowering small towns and rural communities. And there we go. I knew I talked about that. We do work together though. I mean, we all have our own missions in our states. Frankly, the value of PRA is the organizations, the states that have these rural councils have the ability to collaborate, to cooperate, to network, and to learn from each other, best practices, ways to address challenges, opportunities for success. So that's what we're all about as PRA. We are actually embedded in the Farm Bill and have been so since the early 1990s. You'll see that our guiding principles tell us that each state rural development council shall include representation from all agencies, organizations, and individuals who are dedicated to enhancing economic and social opportunities. Notice that the word shall is used, and whenever a federal statute says shall, you don't have any options. So that means we need to be inclusive and really intentionally reach out as state rural development councils to make sure everybody is at the table. We shall seek the support and participation of the governors of our states. So we need engagement from state government. We need to make sure that these state councils have a voice in their own decisions and that they are not tied or controlled by any single person, organization, agency, party, or interest group. These are independent organizations. And that's why sometimes you'll see a state that is not part of the State Rural Development Council, that's not part of PRA, or may not be approved within the framework of this Farm Bill legislation. And that may be because they are within an agency at the state level, and the governor or director may wield undue authority over them. We're going to be open and neutral. We're going to listen to everybody, and we're going to reach major decisions through consensus, and we're going to get our money from lots of different places and people and organizations. So here's the last time we were together as a group was in Illinois. And Blanche, you're going to have to remind me what town this was in. Because it's where we stopped and we had beer, because it was a great little tap room.
I remember the beer, Bill, but not the town.
So this is right out Petersburg, St. Petersburg, right outside. Okay. I think I'm unmuted now. This is St. Petersburg outside of Springfield. And Petersburg is also known for the connections with Abraham Lincoln and Lincoln's birth. So yeah, it was a very fun little place to visit. It's a very interesting little community with a lot of diversity.
So that was our last time together, and our last in-person annual meeting was in Illinois. We were in Springfield, and Blanche and the Rural Partners team organized an amazing day of travel for us on one of the days of our annual meeting. And I will say that the Lincoln element of what we saw in those both big cities, the state capital and in the small towns, was pretty remarkable. But here we are, 4 representatives of the Partners for Rural America organization. And really it's a chance for us kind of collectively to tell both the stories about how our organizations exist, and more importantly, what we're doing today, and then how the federal government is, or in some cases, many cases isn't, helping our individual organizations. We, once upon a time, the State Rural Development Councils got funding through USDA Rural Development. And back in the early 2000s, the then undersecretary decided to stop that funding. And much as was, there have been other instances where federal government funding stops and suddenly organizations go away. And that was the case with some of the state rural development councils. There are about 20 or so existing state rural development councils that are doing amazing stuff, that get no federal funding, but are supported by the state, by utilities, by nonprofits, by folks who have an interest in empowering rural communities. So we are what we are, but there's only 20 of us. That's the frustrating thing. We know that there are active organizations in many states focused on rural. Only 20 of them are actually part of PRA and have taken the steps to become a certified state rural development council by meeting some of those parameters that we outlined in those bullet points. So how could the federal government help support us? Some states, and I'm looking at Kimber, have staffs with 20 people, or more. North Carolina is a great example. Powerhouse organizations with broad capacities. Others, in my state, Iowa, contracts with me for 10 hours a week of my time. So we can do as much as I can fit into 10 or 15 or 20 hours a week, or whatever it takes. So what could federal funding do to us as individual state rural development councils? It could help us expand our capacity and the ability to serve rural communities. But enough about that. I want to quickly bring in my friends and have them just share a little bit about sort of how their state council works, how they're impacting their states, and where the federal government fits in or not. And, Build Back Better was supposed to have had a piece in it that was potentially transformational for us. And that's apparently not going to happen now. So the question becomes, how do we find some other platform for that? But let's go to Michigan. Jessica, thanks for jumping on. Tell me about your work and what's going on in Michigan and how you're making a difference.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. I will say, so my position is policy director at CEDM, which is the Community Economic Development Association in Michigan. But as part of that job, I actually also coordinate our State Rural Development Council, which is Rural Partners of Michigan. We are set up, we don't have funding currently. All of our money comes from our annual conference every year. So I will say, it's a little intimidating to see what the other rural development councils are able to do around the country, because we're doing a lot with very little. But I see right now our main role in Michigan is really connector. We connect the rural communities to each other. We help them learn from each other. We help them, we try to unify their voice and their main policy needs. We can carry that forward to, decision makers and lawmakers and say, hey, this is what's going on in rural communities around the state. So one of the things we do is we do have an annual conference much like this. Unfortunately, the last 2 years it's been virtual, but we're going back in person this year. And I'm really excited because it's such a great learning opportunity. I think rural communities around our state are doing innovative things and programs and, creating new jobs, and to be able to share how they did it with other communities so that they can try to bring that back to their homes too, I think is one of the main things that we do in Michigan right now. I will say we are currently getting ready to hire a contractor, much like Bill, to look at how can we really ramp up our work? How can we get the funding that we need to do more around the state? Because I think the work that our rural council does, no one else in our state is doing. There's a void there. And I see an opportunity to do a lot more to help connect these communities and bring more resources to them.
Kimber, I've already set you up as a powerhouse in Arizona. And while your nonprofit serves the entire state, you have a special niche in rural, don't you?
We do. So our model is a little different than many. So I started Local First Arizona 20 years ago, and then we merged with our Rural Development Council in 2013. And we've really jumped in with gusto. We were operating in rural, and I was serving on that board for the Rural Development Council. So the merger was a bit of a no-brainer. And as a reminder, our boards are required to have federal, state, local, and tribal representation. We adhere to those guidelines very seriously. I'd love to just mention a few of our programs. And then, Bill, you asked the question, talk about our relationship with the feds. I think Arizona generally, we haven't had that much attention from the federal government. So I feel a little bit like we're always jumping up and down saying, we're here, partly because we're a younger state, but partly because we haven't had a leadership that's focused on it. So we just had the Undersecretary, Xochitl Torres-Small here, and I was able to meet her, and we're hoping that's the beginning of a new trend to get that out here. So our organization is quite large at this point, and in rural, we are focused on a few different programs I'll highlight. 6 months ago, we launched the Arizona Economic Recovery Center, which we were able to go out and raise money to contract with grant writers, facilitators, project managers, and others that we can deploy into our rural communities at no cost. We saw the amount of dollars flowing around from the feds and from the state. And we thought, well, these communities are really not going to be that competitive for it. And we're not going to win as much as Arizona should be winning. So the results so far have been astounding. We're 6 months in. We have spent $135,000 on contractors that we have deployed, again, at no cost to the communities, and they've gone on to win just shy of $5 million so far in the first 6 months. On the heels of that, we're going to be rolling out the Community Navigator Grant, and that's a hub and spoke model where we're the hub, and we have 10 other small spoke organizations that are going to roll into those same communities and help to increase their human capacity. So training, partnering, all of the nonprofits that we're going to be working with, we're going to be helping to shore them up so that they are better prepared to support the small businesses in the communities where they serve. And also referring to each other. So if I have one group that's focused on the border, partnering and sharing resources with somebody that's up on Navajo Nation, partnering with somebody else that is running a veteran center, as an example. They all need to know each other, and they need to know what their areas of expertise are so that we can have more referrals. Like Jessica, we run an annual event that's just called the Rural Policy Forum that brings together key leaders from across Arizona, and that's really become our annual opportunity to deeply connect with people. It's a 3-day event that we do in a different rural town. Every year we move it around. This year we're going to be up in a little town called Winslow. You may have heard it from an Eagles song, Standing on the Corner in Winslow, Arizona. We're all going to be right there. And then the last couple of things I wanted to mention, we took over, created a new website at ruralaz.com. You can follow us at #ruralaz. We're developing rural community profiles, and they're just fun glimpses through looking at arts and culture, food and dining, history, heritage and tradition, and outdoor sports and recreation, looking at all that our many rural communities have to offer in hopes that we can encourage more in-state tourism. For those of you that don't know, Arizona, we are an odd duck. We are 7 million people overall. 5 million live in the Phoenix area and another million in the Tucson area. So that leaves 1 million people scattered across the whole remainder of our state. We spend collectively $6.5 billion a year vacationing in California. So our goal at the state's Rural Development Council is to redirect 10% of that out into our rural states every year by getting folks to go out and try what's new. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight is we just launched the Rural Business Academy, which is, it's got 4 different types of curriculum you can sign on for. Each of them has 6 modules. So you can learn about talent recruitment and retention. You can learn about marketing, financials, etc. And those are all aimed at specifically rural business needs, which are uniquely different. And we're launching that and optimistic that we're going to be able to really strengthen and deepen ties amongst business owners in different regions throughout the state. So I'll leave it at that and hand it back to you, Bill, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
I just put up that link to ruralaz.com.
Thank you.
I tell folks that when the Iowa Rural Development Council grows up, it wants to be local first Arizona. I want to do the things that Kimber is doing in my state, because you can see what she has built over the last 20 years and the impact that her group is having. You all must know Blanche. So Blanche, what can you tell folks from Illinois about Illinois Rural Partners?
Well, I would just say a couple of first things. It's just that we are a public-private partnership that focuses on rural matters, rural issues, and rural solutions. Our board of directors is similar to everybody else's, and yet we are more of a volunteer board. We do not have paid staff. So all of the activities that we conduct are all volunteer, and most of our work is has been focused on webinars, sharing information, making, for example, the census, or we sponsor a speaker after the election to have an analysis of what this election might mean for rural and rural policy. Several, you mentioned, Bill, about funding in the past, and yes, we used to have a paid director as well. And when the funding ended for the rural councils, that changed the way that rural partners operated. But I do want to just mention that Illinois, and I think Norm Walser covered this earlier in the conference, that Illinois has kind of a unique structure anyway, because we do not, as rural partners, host the rural conference like other colleagues do, but in fact, the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs is actually the host of the Rural Conference. So much of the delivery of programs comes through our partnership with the Rural Institute. And then also with the Governor's Rural Affairs Council is more of the policy discussion table. So even with funding, we already have a structure in place in Illinois that has grown through a good quality partnership. But I see the opportunity, and I know we've discussed in our membership that there are many things that we could do to replicate some of the other rural partner groups across the country. One in particular in the leadership role. I know that in some of our other states have talked about the leadership workshops that they offer every year. And so we have looked at what the possibilities would be, having hoped for that funding as well, Bill, from the Build Back Better funding. So I would just say, though, the opportunity for those who are joining us today, as you say, many folks on this group know me and can reach out to rural partners or to myself. But at this point, it would be good to hear questions that our audience has, particularly since Kimber, Jessica, and Bill are on here. We want to have more dialogue about what you're wanting to do in your local areas and give them a chance to share what they're doing in response. Thank you.
Thanks, Blanche. It occurred to me as Blanche was talking, individual states are making strategic decisions about choosing to support rural councils or rural focused organizations or not. And as you can tell, with only 20 states that are part of the Partners for Rural America organization, the first question I ask is, why aren't all 50 states involved? Because there are even rural parts of what are thought of as urban states. And shouldn't the federal government be involved in helping to level the playing field? And the answer is yes. But then I think about Tip O'Neill's old maxim, all politics is local. And maybe these really are state decisions that need to be made, and then the federal government steps in afterwards. So, I should mention, I spent almost 8 years as the state director of USDA Rural Development in Iowa. So I kind of know of once I speak. It was great to lead an organization with 42 programs that during my tenure invested $5 billion in rural communities in the state of Iowa. But, when I was in my role as the state director, I didn't work much with the governor, and the governor didn't work much with me. We were sort of, passing trains in the night or ships in the night. So is there a way for the councils to be better bridges, set aside partisan politics, and convene partners based on everyone's collective interest in rural? And that's what I try to do at the Rural Development Council. I was a political appointee in the Obama administration. We have a Republican administration here in Iowa, and we work hand in hand together on projects like Empower Rural Iowa. We have our annual Rural Summit coming up in a couple months, and we'll have 300 to 400 people come to Ames, Iowa. And the Lieutenant Governor is our keynote speaker, as he is every year, because he's the chair of Empower Rural Iowa, which we helped to convince the governor, don't recreate the wheel, create something in partnership with us, and she did. So yeah. I'll just say those unique relationships, state and federal, are sometimes challenging. I view them as opportunities too.
I agree with you, Bill, and I'll just kind of interject here. I actually had a recent conversation. We got a new USDA Rural Development Director, and I had a conversation with him because we've been in partnership with a lot of groups around the state, successful in getting our Department of Ag and Rural Development to create a new position. And it's Rural Economic Development Director at the state level. And so, this I think is a unique position that rural development councils are in, where I talked to the USDA rural development director and said, hey, once that they finally get this person hired into this position, let's team up. We'll take USDA rural development, we'll take the state rural development and the rural partners in Michigan. Let's do a listening session. Let's go around the state to rural areas. Let's do a listening session. Let's see what the top concerns are. And then how do we work together at both the state and federal level to address those? And I think our organizations are uniquely positioned to be able to be that connector.
Back in my old job. Oh, go ahead, Blanche.
I just want to say one thing when we're talking about USDA, because we've been very privileged in Illinois to always have a good working relationship with USDA and have had folks like you heard from this morning with the deputy governor who are very tied to rural, connecting us with the governor's office. So Illinois in the past has been very good, has had a good relationship. I just wanted to share.
I was just going to mention, I remember Tom Vilsack telling me that one of his failures as governor of Iowa was not understanding the impact that USDA rural development could have on the small towns across our state. Hey, quickly, before, I know we probably have questions. Kimber, I want to ask you, we typically when we talk about state rural development councils, we immediately think of RD and USDA. You're seeking other key federal partners, and I want to say SBA is one of those. You may not have been successful, but you're at least trying to connect with those sorts of groups.
Absolutely. Really, Bill, whether it's state or federal government or foundations, local and national, or corporate entities that I would consider that they have common goals. We don't take corporate dollars from those that we're not values aligned with. However, there are a good number that are doing environmental work or other types of work that we are aligned with. So really, we try to look under any stone to see if there's a partnership and an opportunity there. But to your point about being bipartisan, it doesn't matter to me who's in the governor's office or who my senators are, what their affiliation is. If it's federal, I need to work with that office. If it's statewide, I need to work with that office. So we have done a pretty good job of staying out of the politics and working with the appropriate entity. Case in point, in the middle of COVID, when our governor made a decision to distribute $10 million to small rural independent businesses, we were tapped to manage that, because he knew we had the reach and we could get the word out and manage the back end. At the same time, when we launched the Recovery Center, it was Senator Kelly's office that we took door to door in all 15 counties to have an announcement about what the American Recovery Plan was and what the Recovery Center was going to be. So again, it's funny when you try to do a press release with both of them, they sort of jockey for position for who's going to get the top quote, but I will say that we have brought them together. I got emails from people saying, I can't believe you got them both in one press release. I'm like, score. And that's our goal, is to bring everybody under one umbrella.
Okay, we had a question in the chat box from Betsy who wanted to know, how did you organize the Economic Recovery Center?
So I ideated for about a week, and then I put together a slide deck that highlighted what I wanted to do and where I saw the gaps were in our rural communities. So I knew they needed grant writers. I knew they needed facilitators, especially in communities where you're having a town trying to partner with a tribe. You need culturally relevant facilitation. We needed people who could help do economic impact analyses to evaluate what would the outcomes of this grant be. And so I put that all in my slide deck, and then I went out to our biggest entities that would fund this. So the state gave us $250,000. Our Arizona Community Foundation gave us $200,000. Another Vitalist Health Foundation gave us $50,000. Our big utilities contributed. Our big mines contributed. They're committed to rural. Even when the mines are long gone, they're still doing remediation and they still have dollars. And so we were able to raise $875,000. Then we hired 2 people to run it. And then we began simultaneously contracting with professionals and partnering with Senator Kelly's office to do announcements in all 15 counties, where we went on Zoom. We said, learn about the Recovery Center, how it can benefit you, learn about the American Recovery Plan Act. And so we had partners in each town, and I think the lightest turnout we had was 30 to 40 people. It was packed, people learning about it. And then we had a sign-up sheet and a splash page on our website to drive people in so they sign up for a weekly email list. And that's soup to nuts. That's kind of how we've done it.
At our Rural Summit, we feature breakout sessions with small towns that share best practices. We don't bring in experts to talk from a 30,000 foot level. We don't talk about service deliverers or providers. We bring the communities together to tell these stories, these successes. I want Kimber to tell this story about the Recovery Center to a bigger group, because I think what you did in the face of a pandemic, it was absolutely amazing. And it's a story that is replicable moving down the path. It doesn't have to be a pandemic that drives these sorts of creativity. So
well, thanks, Ellen. And you let me know, and I'll do whatever I can to help others do something similar. I know I'm in a unique situation, being able to raise that much money in a matter of a couple of weeks with nothing but a slide deck. But if you have the relationships, I'm telling you, if there's ever been money out there, it's now.
Jessica, when Kimber talks about Phoenix and Tucson, I think about your state, and everyone says Michigan, oh, and Detroit. Maybe they'll mention Lansing or Grand Rapids. But, if you think about the state of Michigan, you're one big rural, state.
We absolutely are. Yeah. And that's the thing too. I think, I work more at the state level than the federal level, but if I'm bringing forth an issue and it has rural attached, I have the legislature's attention. I mean, we have the UP, we have Northern Michigan. Outside of, Detroit and Grand Rapids, Michigan is very rural. And so there's a lot of power in that. And I think, as a state rural development council, trying to bring that unified voice of what is going on around the state in our rural communities is really powerful.
Have you had any success working with agencies like EDA, like SBA? I know the world doesn't revolve around rural development like I'd like to think it does, but have you had any success with other federal agencies?
I can't point to anything that we have had success in, but I will also say I think it's a capacity issue with our council. Much like you, Bill, that you're 10 hours a week, I'm probably a little bit less than that. Our rural partners in Michigan actually contracts with CEDAM, who I work for, to run the council. And so I love to hear of successes that other state rural development councils have, because I think we can definitely build on their experiences there.
Blanche, go ahead, Blanche.
Sorry, I was just going to say, one of the things I'd mentioned for Illinois, in the capacity that you're speaking of, the Rural Institute really fills that capacity for Illinois for us. When Kimber mentioned about the Community Navigator initiative, so the Rural Institute serves as a hub in our area, and then we have a number of community navigators. And so I think that there's a number of different ways to look at those opportunities. The Western Illinois University serves as a business development center that deploys folks around the Western Illinois area. So I just want folks in Illinois to know that those services are available, just not quite through the rural council structure that we had in the past.
Quick reminder, if you have a question, either shout at me or put it up in the chat box. I'm going to ask a question, but I'm going to preface it with my example. And that is, we recently got a grant through our State Department of Public Health, the IDPH, which got a grant from the CDC through the CARES Act. And it was to target post-COVID health disparities. And when you think about health disparities, you think, well, why is the Rural Development Council involved? This is a health issue. Well, in fact, social determinants of health are things like food access, housing, transportation. So in fact, rural health and rural development intersect all the time. So what we're going to do is spend the next 18 months reaching out into rural communities and helping them talk, recognize, and then address health disparities that might exist. And we're actually using CDC money to do that. have you guys gotten any ARPA money, any CARES Act money? You know, where, I mean, has the pandemic brought you any new resources that you didn't have before? Other than Kimber, you shaking the money tree and raising all that amazing money from Arizona partners.
Yeah, I would say we were able to transform really the work that we do. So we're still distributing grants, loans, and then our work, you know, the Navigator grant. There's so much that has come through for our organization that we've been able to pivot and become an essential resource for our rural communities, really. So we also just applied for the Good Jobs Challenge. You know, I heard there were over 500 applicants statewide, so I'm not holding my breath, but we did pull together 5 rural counties in one proposal to focus on a comprehensive workforce development plan by playing off of each of their strengths and helping them collaborate. I just really strongly, you know, collaboration runs through everything we do. And I see rural towns that do one thing really well. And, you know, from a user perspective, if you're a job seeker or a company looking to employ, you would like to be able to look across a broader region than, you know, every time you go across county lines, you got to start over with relationships and strategies. So bringing together all of them in one, you know, into one comprehensive strategy, I think is a much better approach. So to answer your question, Bill, with the amount of money that's flowing around right there, knocking on doors, being open to partnerships in a new way, I think has just been really transformative for us.
Yeah, and I'll say in Michigan, one of the programs that you know, is kind of a new partnership for us is through our Department of Health and Human Services. They administer the low-income heating credit money, and noticed that during the pandemic, the rates of people actually who qualify for it, applying for it, had gone down a lot. And we were trying to figure out, how do we connect people with those tax credits that they need in those rural areas? And one of the ways is, you know, VITA sites, the free income tax preparation sites. And my organization actually runs the statewide coalition for those free tax sites. And in those rural areas, it's really tough because, you know, you'll have one site in a county. Not everyone has transportation to get there. So we've been able to tap into some of the administration money from the Department of Health and Human Services to increase our virtual tax prep sites in rural areas around the state. So it's been a really interesting partnership. So I mean, it's brand new right now, but I do think there is a lot of money out there. And if you already have those strong relationships, like Kimber said, there's definitely a lot of opportunity to tap into that to get these really vital programs funded.
Blanche, I'm sure there's all sorts of CARES Act and ARPA money flowing through rural Illinois right now.
Yes, and I think most of that is going through the local governments and through some of the community action agencies that manage the LIHEAP programs and stuff like that. Actually, we're, from a rural partners perspective, we're not seeing those funds. They're coming through other organizations.
You know, that makes me think of an interesting story I heard recently, and that was from one of our partners who is at the State League of Cities. And he was mentioning to me that a lot of very small towns haven't spent their ARPA money yet because they're scared. They don't want to break the law. They don't want to go to jail. They don't want to misspend the money and then have to pay a big fee or fine afterwards. So they're not spending it. And part of that is because they don't have the capacity, if you're a town of 500 or 1,000 necessarily, to get your arms around that. And that's been a challenge. And I think I will say for myself, that may be one of our failures as a state rural development council over the pandemic, is not being a better resource to the small towns and the rural counties that really don't have the capacity to think like this.
Yeah, we had some of our smaller rural areas actually turn down the extra money. And I agree with you. I think part of it is just they didn't have the capacity to figure out what to do with it.
Good question from John here. What role do you think public school districts play in rural community development? How involved are schools in the partnerships or projects that your organizations head up. Jessica, what's going on in Michigan on that front?
That is a great question. I don't think beyond, I think much like Iowa's conference, Michigan conference every year, I bring in one big keynote speaker, but the rest of the sessions are all rural communities learning from other rural communities. So I think in that context, we've definitely been engaged with some rural school districts who are doing some really innovative and interesting things. So I would say that's where that plays in for our council.
For us, Bill, there's two areas. One is we do a lot of work in workforce development in rural areas using a methodology called Talent Pipeline Management, or TPM. It's a U.S. Chamber-led initiative that we have 3 people on our team who've been trained to do. So we convene collaboratives around industries and sectors. And one of them is around education, because we have such a teacher shortage in our rural communities. Really listening to the school districts about what skills they're looking for. And then that brings me to my second point, which is partnering with our community colleges. Our rural community colleges, just last year, our governor introduced opportunity for them to offer 4-year degrees, which to us is a game changer for keeping youth in our rural towns if they can get that 4-year degree. So we're convening the collaboratives of the school districts to figure out what sort of skills they need, they're looking for, what are their challenges and pain points around recruitment, feeding that back to the community colleges and leadership to help with everything from, the wraparound services, housing, childcare, all those things that we all know are in need there, and being able to translate that into an actionable, like 1, 2, 3 step plan to make a difference in these communities.
One thing I would point out is that in a lot of small towns, the school district is the largest employer.
Yep.
So from a workforce perspective, school districts want more families, because at least in Iowa, there's a per pupil payment from the state. So they want more residents, but they also have to be able to attract and retain teachers. Mm-hmm. So there's a relationship between K-12 and economic development in small towns that if it doesn't exist, it should, because it's mutually beneficial to both. I think the superintendent needs to be looked at as a CEO, from the perspective of the economic developer. And he also needs to look at that economic development organization as a partner in generating enrollment and keeping teachers and staff and everything else. And they are, I feel the same way about rural hospitals too. And I can't get the rural hospital CEOs to think of themselves as economic engines, but they are.
They are, and they need to be involved in every conversation around affordable housing and all of those things that are, the silent things that prevent them from being able to recruit. I mean, they know about them, but they don't understand how policy decisions can impact them, operating in silos a little bit, at least here in Arizona.
A quick note, there is a session coming up on engaging teachers in local community efforts at 2:15. So if you want to change your channel from us to them at 2:15, that'd be a good thing to think about. We've got under 10 minutes remaining. Blanche, other than you'd like some money so that you can hire not just a full-time staffer, but a staffer, what else would be the biggest impacts that could help Illinois Rural Partners moving forward?
Well, I think just when you listen to what other folks are doing and the opportunity to plant the seed or be the kickoff for some new initiatives and the opportunity to go to communities and hear what not only what their issues are, many of us know what those are, but also to help lead that conversation on where are some solutions. And many years ago, Rural Partners did sponsor those listening sessions around the state and gathered some really good information. And that was a really excellent platform for a discussion around the Governor's Rural Affairs Council table to discuss rural policy and the effects of rural policy. I think the other thing that we could very much benefit from in a state like Illinois, where Chicago is definitely a major player, and some of the representation, our General Assembly has shifted from the rural areas. One of the things that we've looked very seriously at are those partnerships. Where can we come together on issues, urban and rural? And one of those clearly is broadband. And so we've seen a great investment in Illinois on broadband and some good leadership, some good and some very active participation by the rural communities in the broadband. But I feel like some of that funding was not just rural voices saying we need this, but urban voices too in their communities. So wherever we can find and foster those partnerships, I feel like as volunteers, we know this needs to be done, but when you have a paid job to do, it's sometimes hard to find the time as a volunteer to do some of the things you really feel are important. So I could see some of the work that we've been doing really being advanced.
So if you've solved the broadband problem, what's the number 1 issue in Illinois right now?
Oh, I would say broadband's still a number 1 issue because we still, if you talk to telehealth, they need that. The school systems still need broadband. So we haven't solved that problem. We've just started on that problem. Workforce is always an issue too, as Kimber talks about. My region from a workforce perspective is pretty rural, and I don't think we're any different than anyone else. We're still looking for workers, but we also have to have conversations, and we think rural partners would be good at kind of introducing that conversation of, are you a welcoming community? If folks were listening to the plenary session and just that, there's a time now for rural. Folks are interested in rural, and have we positioned ourselves so that we can be that welcoming part of the country for someone to come, not just to come back home, but somebody new to come. And so we've had some of those conversations around the state too, and sponsored some of those webinars on, just that asset mapping, not from a, what do I have as a tourist attraction or the history that we do want to celebrate, but what are our assets from a people perspective? And are we bringing those talents to the table? And and where are those attitudes and the politics at versus solving the problem and finding a solution type of conversation? So that's been really, I see all of that as possibilities if we were able to have at least a part-time staff to just kind of make that outreach and get us set up as volunteers for that.
Hey, Kimber, if I were looking at the whiteboard that's out of the picture in your office, what's the number 1 issue on that whiteboard that you haven't been able to tackle yet that you need to jump into?
So there's 2 that we're in the middle of right now. One is housing. That's a big issue in Arizona. We just have a major shortage of housing. I think it's across the country, but it's pretty extreme here. We've got entire villages popping up in our forests. I mean, it's grim. And then the second one is access to capital. This may be different than other states, but we only have 13 community banks here that are committed to local lending. We have 8 counties that have no local lending choice decision making at all. We've got branches of big global banks that just don't provide small business lending, and that's like a chokehold on our small town economies. So those, other than broadband, which Blanche talked about, and workforce, those would be the next 2 on our list. Those are our top 4 right there.
Jessica, is there something else on your top 4 list that hasn't been mentioned already, or something that's unique to Michigan?
No, I mean, housing is coming up number 1, like Kimber said. I think in Michigan, housing is number 1. We don't put any state resources into housing. The only housing money we get is from the federal government, and we're seeing a real crisis across the state. I think one of the challenges that we have is everyone knows housing is a problem, but what's a solution? And there are all these solutions floating around out there. And so what we're trying to do is create that unified message. Here's the problem, here's a solution, because otherwise I'm not sure that we're going to get focused enough to address it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I think about our state, and yes, housing, workforce, access to capital. One thing that you guys haven't mentioned that I'll just mention, although it came up briefly, and that is the next generation of rural leaders. who's going to lead the charge in the future if all the young people are moving away to the big city, and all the old people are not going to be around forever? So who fills that void? And that's a big challenge too. Yeah, Kimber. I know we have about 1 minute too.
This is a big one, Bill. And we generally just call it succession planning. So whether we're talking about rural leaders, but also business owners, you've heard about the silver tsunami of all of the baby boomers that are getting ready to retire from their businesses. That's going to be devastating to rural if we don't have succession plans in place, which is why I think models like worker-owned cooperatives and ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, really, we need to give that a good hard look and figure out how we can fund those transitions to keep those businesses in place.
Amen. Amen to that. Thank you, Michigan, Illinois, Arizona, Jessica, Blanche, Kimber. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Partners for ruralamerica.com. If you're not from Illinois and you're in another state and you want your state to get engaged, have them call me. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
conference.
Mhm.